Good afternoon, and welcome to Between the Pillars, the Fisher Library's video podcast series, where we get to meet library staff, we get to meet library collections. I'm John Shoesmith. I'm the outreach librarian here at the Fisher Library, and today is February 25th, 2022, and we're continuing our themed month, our special themed month, which we're calling our Special Collections Friends. 2 weeks ago, we had Rachel and Christina on from the Media Commons Media Archives. If you did miss that, it's up on our YouTube channel, so I'd encourage you to watch that. This week, we're featuring a department that we actually share the building with. We share the Fisher building with, the University of Toronto Archives and Records Management Services. We tend to acronym it as UTARMS, or sometimes, as I said, we just call it the University Archives. So today's guest is the University Archivist, Tys Klumpenhouwer. So welcome, Tys. Thank you for being on the podcast. As you can see, Tys is, we are in the same building today. I'm on the main mezzanine floor. Tys is up in his fourth floor office. So those who have ever visited Fisher, just to kind of place where the University Archives is, they're actually above our top mezzanine floor. So on the third and fourth floor. And Tys, actually, when people do come in, I do try to explain that there's more to this library than just my department, Rare Books and Special Collections. It's the University Archives is also here. And I usually sort of fumble my way in terms of talking about what you guys have. I'll point to the University Charter. I'll point to old issues of the Varsity, for example. But with people, we're going to be doing tours again. And I need to up my game in terms of better describing the material that you have at the University Archives, because there's some, we're connected in some ways, but we're very independent in others. So maybe you can just kind of give us the quick overview of University of Toronto, the University Archives, and your mandate, what you collect, etc.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me, John.
You're welcome.
I do the same thing, of course, when we do tours. Walk in and everybody sees your wonderful collections, as you can see behind you. And one of the first things we do, is differentiate between what the two departments do. So University of Toronto Archives and Records Management Services, our kind of shortened mandate is really to acquire, preserve, and make accessible documentary heritage of the U of T. And we do that as a permanent resource in support of the university's operational, educational, and research needs. And in doing this, we really aim to capture diverse perspectives of the U of T's history.
Right.
So what ends up happening is we have kind of, we think of it as our collection areas are split into three main groups. And those are university records, so
right,
the official university records of the University of Toronto. You mentioned the charter, but those are things like records from the Office of the President, records from Governing Council, records from the Chief Librarian's Office as well. Right. University records is very administrative, operational records. And so that's the support of the university's operational mandate. So we get staff coming in here saying, I need to see minutes from an old faculty council meeting, right, so that we can make informed decisions going forward. We also have private records. Records from faculty, staff, prominent students, U of T student groups, U of T community groups. We have the mandate to collect those records as well. So big collections that we have, the records of Harold Innes, Ursula Franklin, who I've brought some examples of Ursula Franklin's records. Organizations like Science for Peace. We have somebody in the reading room right now actually doing some research on that organization. So there's the university records, the private records, and then we also have an area of collection for university publications. So we kind of serve as the main resource or repository for official university publications like U of T calendars. But we also collect student or community-led publications. We have the entire print run of the Varsity, also digitized and available online. And so those are kind of long print run publications. We also have kind of shorter community or student-led publications like The Otherwise, which is a feminist newspaper between 84 and 87, things like that, which we've also digitized. So some of these are long print runs, some of these are short print runs, but we try and serve as the kind of official repository for those publications, which aren't technically archival resources, they're secondary, but they really complement our main areas of collections, the university records and the private records.
Well, you're capturing a story, really, of the entire university, and those kind of groups play such an important role in that story.
Yeah, and the way we've tried to capture these things has changed over time. For example, some groups are harder to document than others, right? You can think of student groups. Students are here for a limited amount of time, right? 4 years for an undergraduate, which stretches out in certain cases. 2 years for a master's, X number of years for a PhD.
Right.
They aren't here as long, and so it's harder to capture those stories. Whereas faculty members are here for, I mean, they get tenured and they're here forever, right?
Right.
So we see that in our collections, and so we have more representation from certain areas than others. But one of the things we try and do is adjust our collection strategy and our documentation strategy, which we can talk about too, to try and address holes or gaps and create a fulsome history of the University of Toronto.
Well, it's especially important too, given our university mandate of increasing equity and diversity, and some of those publications play a very key role, I would think, in showing that that maybe struggle toward diversity as well at the same time.
Absolutely. And so I mentioned The Otherwise, which was that feminist newspaper from 84 to 87. A good example of that, and a reason why we try and make those things kind of accessible through digitization as well. I mentioned earlier the documentation strategy, which is our kind of ongoing, evolving mandate within our mandate for the private record side of things, which Daniela Ansavini, our private records archivist. She leads that and crafts that and helps it evolve over time so that we are reacting not only to new ways of collecting, but new areas of collecting, and making sure that we're able to communicate with areas that maybe are not so well represented in our collections.
Right.
Find out why. Address that in various ways, whether that's building relationships to try and usher material in, or to ensure that these groups have the resources they need to properly document themselves, and we can link to them in some way if they want. So that kind of encapsulates the private records area that Daniela works on.
Obviously,
so it's kind of evolving.
Yeah, well, and then those records really do play an important role. Obviously, it's been a struggle since the pandemic in terms of collecting. I mean, it's been a struggle here in terms of collecting. How has the archives evolved over the last couple of years then, in terms of whether you're trying to collect material, trying to make material more accessible in this difficult, challenging time?
Yeah, well, of course, we went through the periods of shutdown that everybody went through, but we haven't stopped collecting, and the types of things we collect have started to. We see a change in the types of things we've collected, and we kind of are forced to adapt in various ways. We still have done kind of the traditional archival collecting, right, of paper material. We continue to get donations in. We continue to process on site in a limited capacity. One of the exciting collections we got from the university was a collection of must be over 250 anatomy charts. So I didn't talk much about the types of material we collect. So of course we collect textual material. Textual, we think of that both in paper and in analog and digital format. We collect special media. So Marnie Gamble, our special media archivist, who collects and manages the photograph collection and sound and moving image. And so works actually in some cases with Rachel and Christina, who you had on last time, to share best practices and preservation techniques and that kind of stuff. Architectural records and maps, digital records. another one of our colleagues, Emily Summers, the digital records archivist, helps us with that. We have a few artifacts which people love to see, but we're not museum curators. We're not so great at
You mean
managing.
you mean like the football?
Like the football, yes, the famous Grey Cup football that we have from the early 20s, I think it was.
Right.
That we like to show off. But yeah, we show that off because it's eye-catching, but it's not an archival. No. It's not well, it could be argued that it's an archival record in some way, but it really, like the publications, it enhances the experience of doing archival research, and we can use it in exhibits and whatnot. So where was I? I was talking about architecture records and maps, digital material. And so these anatomy charts that we got in, it's really artwork. You can see actually an example of, these are zoology charts, just back there, which we've had for quite some time. We like to show off those zoology charts because they are art now. We can look at them as art. I mean, they were art when they were created too, but teaching material, right? Mm-hmm. I often tell students that come through, this is like the old PowerPoint presentation that you're instructing. Exactly. But UofT, the Department of Zoology, had artists on staff. This is Irene Nosek, who is pretty well documented in our collections. Right. She would draw these, and they're very well preserved. And so with this summer, when there's lots of movement going on in the Faculty of Medicine and things being shifted around, we had the opportunity to actually acquire these anatomy charts, which we used as teaching charts in anatomy. So we kind of have the parallel collection to what you see behind me.
And you're digitizing a lot of that material. You're getting it photographed, is that right?
Yeah, they're hard to digitize because of the size, but we're making sure we have images of nearly every one of these, so that people can kind of cycle through them, and then if they want to see them in person, we can pull them out. So this was a huge undertaking that actually Marnie helped with. I have some slides that I can show.
Yeah, I'd love to see them.
Process looks like, and it kind of segues into some more of the collecting that I'd love to talk about. So I'll just pull this up here.
Yeah. We have some similar zoological charts. I don't know if you've seen them down in our basement in 1B.
I have, yeah. I've seen some of the primates down.
Yeah.
The charts of the primates.
Yeah.
Can you see this?
Yep. Definitely. Yep.
Yeah. So just a couple of examples. You can see they're kind of similar to the one behind me, but now we have these charts that document the human anatomy.
Yep.
Some of them look very similar to the things you'd see in Gray's Anatomy, right? So you can imagine students.
And to our anatomy side too, to the fishes.
Yeah. Especially the one on the right here reminds me very much of that.
Right.
So this is what they look like. But just very quickly on our next slide here, you can see Marnie showing off the original state of them.
Wow.
And then we have specially ordered these boxes, which was an event, but these telescoping boxes. So now they're rolled nicely. The material that we needed to remove from around the borders, the metal has been removed, and they're nicely stored in our shared storage space there down in B1.
It's funny because I was down in 1B yesterday looking at thinking, what are those boxes? I've never seen those before.
Now you know.
Now I know. That's great.
Yeah. So go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, so we are still collecting. This is just one example of the kind of analog, the traditional archival material that we collect.
Right.
We've had to kind of make some shifts too, and this was before the pandemic started, but it really accelerated by this pandemic era that we're in. To kind of new ways of collecting and new ways of trying to reach our community and document our community. So we've had web archives for quite some time, but we've really picked up our web archiving initiative under Emily, and created ways for people to tell us what websites should be archived. So we have a process whereby our users can say, hey, doesn't have to be an official university website, but it can be documenting a student group.
Yep.
Say, hey, this should be crawled as part of our institutional history, or it's a part of our community history. So people can reach out to us and have us fill out a kind of an appraisal report, and we
Right.
assess that and say, hey, yeah, let's add that to our collections.
Just out of my own ignorance, I mean, where do they store it on a server? I mean, how do people access some of the older
It's
work?
all through the Internet Archive. So,
Okay.
they're next door to us. So yes, a server, but at the risk of sounding even more ignorant than I already sound, that's a question for Emily about
Okay.
the background of that. So people can reach out to us now and say, hey, this should be part of your collection, and it's kind of hosted, and we serve as a portal to that. We also see things, and this of course was before the pandemic, community reaction to events, to things happening on campus in Toronto and Ontario, evolving and being understood via social media.
Right.
And so the question is, how do we capture that? And so Emily, with the help of Daniela, because this is kind of a private records thing, right?
Of course, yeah.
So Emily and Daniela have created this policy and this process whereby we can document time-sensitive campus events through social media. So we actually have tools to kind of the same way we crawl websites, crawl Twitter,
right,
and capture some of the reactions to what's going on. Of course, that presents us with a new set of problems when it comes to privacy and ethics, right?
Right.
People post on Twitter. I don't tweet much, but people post on Twitter, and they don't really post with any idea that it's going to be extracted from Twitter and ingested into an archive. So we have to ask ourselves some tough questions around privacy and the right to be forgotten.
Right.
And so our social media collecting policy has that built in, and it has the capability that if a tweet is deleted in real time or edited in real time, it's no longer accessible in the archival setting as well. So making sure that we're able to capture these things as they happen, because of course Twitter is not fixed like a piece of paper that we used to collect, but it tells a big part of the story, people's reactions.
And I think it's an important part. It's an important reminder too that the role of the archivist is not just collecting there's a lot of kind of judgment calls that archivists have to make, and it's not just collecting paper for the sake of paper. They have got to think about some of these broader issues.
Absolutely, yeah. And so I mentioned the documentation strategy earlier, and how Danielle is kind of evolving that, and making sure that stays current with these types of questions.
What about digital records? I mean, in terms of nobody's sending paper memos anymore, people are sending emails. Is that easily capturable as well?
Yes, well, easy, I shouldn't say easy. Again, Emily would be able to tell you whether she thinks that's easy or not, but Emily does have strategies for, of course, our chief librarian, Larry Alford. One of the big questions he always asks us here at the archives,
right?
How am I going to archive my email? And so Emily has been thinking about this and has a number of tools that can help kind of appraise en masse email inboxes using keywords, and sifting through stuff that might be personal, and because people use their email as a communication device, not as a record keeping tool for the most part.
Right.
And so we want to make sure we're not capturing private things when we capture a university administrator's email, for example.
Right.
So there is software that Emily utilizes to ensure that's done in a fair and reasonable way.
So let's
I
end
was
on.
just going to mention here.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
This COVID-19 Collecting Community Experience Project, which I think you've probably heard of because we started it early in the pandemic. And this was kind of another reaction by archivists to be like, hey, this is happening so fast. We want to be able to document what's going on here. And so we've invited. What's that? Sorry?
We didn't think it would be lasting 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. So I think people might be sick of contributing to this experience project, but it's interesting because it's been such a long period that, we have the potential to get multiple submissions to this experience project, where we're asking people to answer a series of questions about how they're experiencing the pandemic, how it's affecting their schoolwork, their life, their personal life, their work, right? And seeing how that has shifted over the last 2.5 years is kind of I mean, it's interesting, and it's something that we'll be able to look back on in some time. But it's also a community project. It's not us deciding what's good and what's bad. It's our community here at UofT submitting to us their experience. So yeah, these kind of represent some of the newer methods of retaining the history of the University of Toronto.
Why don't we end on something by showing maybe talking about some of your favorite items that you come across in the archives. And I know you took our document camera upstairs, so I assume you got something to show us.
Yes. Yeah. I don't have a favorite. I mean, it changes all the time, but
don't you often get that question though from people that come through? Say, what is your favorite item? I get it all the time.
Yeah. And my favorite item typically depends on how I can relate it to something in the university's past and relating it to something that's happening now.
Right.
And seeing if we can learn anything from that item, or if it relates to something that's happening now in any way. And so when we talked about doing this podcast, I thought, hey, I know of something that might be interesting. So I'm just going to switch on the document camera right now. And I mentioned Ursula Franklin earlier. One of my, it's not a thing, but it's a collection. It's one of our most heavily used collection, Ursula Franklin. I'm sure you know about her and everything that she's done. Like I said,
they've renamed a street after her as well. Close to here.
Yeah. So let me flip this on here for you. So what we've got here, and I'll zoom in a little bit.
I'll turn off my camera so we could see it in bigger view.
Tell me if you can see that.
Yep.
Yeah, so this comes from Ursula Franklin Font, and this was an accession that we got in mid-2000s. One of our previous colleagues, Karen Sertam, who you also know, processed this material. And this is a collection of material from kind of a sub-series within her records from this group called Voice of Women. And Ursula Franklin was really active in the Canadian peace movement and promoting disarmament, diplomacy, peace. And so what we have here is a telegram that she and her husband sent to Pierre Elliott Trudeau in 1970 during the October crisis.
Right.
So the FLQ and when Trudeau enacted the War Measures Act, which was very controversial back then, of course. And she writes to him, and you can probably read it here, but I'll say it out loud. Your unwarranted overreaction destroys the credibility of democratic government. Resign if you can't cope using existing laws. So,
are you sure she didn't write this last week to our current minister?
Yeah, right. So it's very similar to what we see. I mean, I would never put Ursula Franklin in the same camp as or the same group as
the anti-vax movement.
People arguing, yeah. But obviously, being a part of Voice of Women and promoting Canadian peace, the Trudeau's implementing the War Measures Act was a big deal and was an issue for her and many people. So she wrote to Trudeau or sent this telegram, which is interesting in itself, right? Many people, especially undergrads who come in now,
you would never know what that is.
Yeah, exactly. Got a kind of canned response, which I haven't pulled out here, but I have pulled out. She wrote Tommy Douglas too.
Okay.
And hopefully you can see that. I'll zoom in a little bit closer.
I love the idea of the immediacy of the telegram. You know, that was yesterday's email.
Yeah. Urge non-confidence vote. Emergency deliberately escalated by government hides Canada's serious social and economic, I believe, problems.
Yep.
So she does get a nice letter back from Tommy Douglas, leader of the NDP. I'm going to zoom out so you can see the entire thing, and I won't read it there, but a kind of nice response to Dr. Franklin there. So, I mean, you compare that to now the debate going on over the Emergencies Act. It's kind of interesting, right?
You're right. Amazing.
So I'm going to switch back to my my webcam, and I guess one of the final things I wanted to mention about new ways of collecting and filling holes, making a more fulsome record. I mentioned collecting social media websites. Our ability to document the students has really been enhanced recently by oral history initiatives. So oral histories are becoming more popular.
Right.
And one of the big projects that is getting quite a bit of attention and a lot of use here at the archives is our digitizing of oral history collections, which are available online. And particularly our most recent project, which was the oral history collection on student activism.
Okay.
Which again, I mentioned Daniela, but this is another one of Daniela's initiatives as part of the documentation strategy to interview 17 former UofT students who were involved in student initiatives across all 3 campuses.
Right.
So things like childcare options for students. She interviewed Julie Mathin, who was a member of the group that put together the childcare options for students on campus.
Right.
Sita Ramkalawansing, who's done many things at the city of Toronto level, but as a student here, she was a prominent community activist and founding member of the Student Initiated Teaching Collective in one of Canada's first women's studies courses.
Right.
She's in there. And Ike Okafor, who was a founding member of the Black Students Association and is now actually working at UofT in service learning and diversity outreach within the Faculty of Medicine. So these collections are kind of heavily used. There's kind of an exhibit of it on our website. And you asked me about things that are being used and how we've been servicing researchers over the last couple of years. This has been a highlight. And there are 17 oral history interviews covering this area of student activism in this area, probably about the 60s to 90s. Danielle can give exact dates. Full transcripts are available, but a really rich resource that's helping us, again, have a more fulsome perspective on the UofT's histories, especially from the student perspective.
We'll post links to those in the show notes.
Yeah.
So if people want to find more information about what you have or kind of look at finding aids, where do they go? Do they start at your website or?
Start at our website. We do have over 11 kilometers of textual material, which will be available shortly again when people can come in. But we have 200,000 photographs available online. I've spoken about the oral histories. We have all kinds of digitized publications like the Varsity available, and we're constantly growing our store of digital material online that's available for people. So start at the website. Our descriptive database for all our collections is right there. And you mentioned something at the very beginning about our name, University of Toronto Archives and Records Management Services, right? So people often forget the records management side of things, but it's near and dear to my heart because that's where I started.
Okay.
So I just don't want people to forget that the records management service is an important part of our mandate, not only because university staff need help managing the records, but it's a really good way to usher in these university records. So we have and build our collections. So when we go out to units and give them training on records management, it's a good opportunity to say, hey, have you made a deposit at the archives recently? So Andrea, who's in charge of the records management program. She helps usher in all of these materials. So helped Marnie with that set of anatomy drawings that came in. So all of these things help us really build our collections.
Tys, this has been amazing. This will definitely help me next time when the tour group comes through, and I try to explain a little bit better what UTARMS does and the mandate. I do also like to remind people that this is a shared space between two very important departments and two departments that get along very well too. So, so thanks, Tys. Thanks for coming on the podcast. As I say, we'll post some of these links in the show notes on the YouTube page. we're going to be taking a little bit of a break. I'm going to be taking some time off, so we won't be doing another podcast probably until the end of March. Don't know what we're doing yet, but we will definitely do something at the end of the month. So until then, watch both of our websites, because we're both going to be having some, we're very limited opening right now for researchers, but that will be changing over the next couple of weeks. So I encourage you to check both the Fisher Library's website and UTARMS website for some of our reopening plans. So again, thanks again, Tys. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and we will see you in about 3 to 4 weeks' time.